It was one of those rare, intoxicating mornings in late April, the kind that fools you into believing that everything broken might be made whole again. Sunlight spilled through the wide bay windows of my house in Wellsford, a sleepy Connecticut suburb where secrets wore smiles and betrayal brewed beneath manicured lawns. I had woken before dawn, heart hammering, not from fear, not yet, but from anticipation. Today was the day. Not just any day. Today, I was finally going to give my mother, Helen, a birthday gift that would leave a mark, one she'd never forget. Parked in the driveway under a canopy of blooming dogwoods was her brand-new Aston Martin V12 Vantage, silver like moonlight, sleek, unapologetic, and worth every cent of the $500,000 I'd paid. I had spent weeks orchestrating the moment, down to the smallest flourish. The flowers. The box. The silence before the reveal. I imagined her face, the stunned joy, the disbelief, maybe even tears. That was what I wanted. Needed. Because it wasn't just about the car. It was about everything that had come before. There was a time we had nothing. No comfort, no cushion, no certainty. When I was 8, my father vanished into the night like a ghost who'd grown tired of haunting his own family. He left behind only debts and shadows. My mother, Helen, held what remained of us together with aching fingers and unspoken grief, 2 jobs, sleepless nights, and a fire in her eyes that refused to die. My older brother, Anthony, and I learned to adapt, to survive. We grew up in a crumbling apartment in East Shore, Queens, where the walls were thin and the dreams thinner. But Helen never stopped promising us something better. Maybe that's where my hunger was born, in that damp, narrow kitchen where we ate discount cereal and watched her scrub hope into the floorboards. When I turned 18, I packed a duffel bag and left for New York with nothing but a second-hand laptop and a vision. I spent years clawing my way up, bleeding time and sanity to build Crown Digital, a modest idea that metastasized into a tech empire. From the cluttered corner of a Harlem studio to a glass-walled office high above Midtown, I lived off caffeine and code, lost friends, lost sleep, lost count of how many times I almost broke. But I didn't. Because I had a reason. Her. By 32, I was a millionaire, not the overnight kind, but the sleepless, war-forged kind. And now, I was going to pay it forward. Anthony had taken the train down from Halston for the weekend. I hadn't told him much, just hinted that I had something special planned. I wanted the shock on everyone's face. But most of all, I wanted to see it in hers. The car had arrived just before sunrise. I stood barefoot in the doorway, watching the delivery crew wheel it off the truck like a prize stallion. It shimmered in the morning light like something holy. I couldn't stop looking at it, or at what it meant. It was more than horsepower. It was a monument to everything I had conquered. By noon, the house was perfect. The floors gleamed. The tulips I'd ordered sat fresh in a crystal vase. And on the kitchen counter, a velvet box with a key fob nestled inside, sleek, simple, and dangerous, waited like a loaded secret. I heard the door open. Laughter. Light footsteps. Then voices drifting in from the porch, soft and tangled in spring air. I peered out. My mother, elegant even in age, walked arm in arm with Anthony. Her gray hair caught the sunlight like silver wire. She was laughing, that low, familiar sound that once meant comfort. My chest tightened. I wanted to freeze the moment, make it sacred. I stayed in the kitchen, breathing in the stillness, arranging the box again though it didn't need arranging. My hands trembled. Not from nerves. From hope. Then I heard my name. I should have walked into the room. I should have announced the gift. But something in my mother's tone, brittle, cold, edged like glass, froze my steps. I didn't mean to eavesdrop. But I did. I leaned silently against the wall, breath caught in my throat. The voices were low, almost conspiratorial. I just wish she'd dropped dead already, my mother muttered, voice laced with venom I'd never heard before. Then we could finally get our hands on her empire. There was a pause. A silence so vast it felt like the world had stopped spinning. Then Anthony laughed, a sharp, joyless snort that made my skin crawl. Easy, Mom, he said, tone flat with hunger. She's not going anywhere. Not yet. I heard the clink of glasses. Toasting, maybe. Or mocking. They spoke of me like I was nothing more than a vault waiting to be emptied. Not a daughter. Not a sister. Just currency. Just a target. And in that moment, something inside me shattered. Or maybe, finally, something woke up. The world tilted, and for a breathless instant, I felt unmoored, as if gravity had betrayed me, too. I stood motionless in the hallway, the velvet gift box quivering in my hand. Its weight seemed unbearable now, filled not with joy but humiliation. My ears rang. My pulse thudded against my ribs like a trapped animal. Somewhere, distantly, my mother's laughter echoed, sharp, unfamiliar, laced with venom. A flood of memories crashed through me, the birthdays spent planning surprises they pretended to love, the late-night phone calls filled with empty affection, the Christmases where I played Santa and they played grateful. All of it, a farce. A theater of lies built on my naive hunger to be loved. I was never family to them. I was a transaction. The empire I'd bled to build was nothing more than a nest egg in their eyes. A shield they hadn't earned but expected. I could see it all now, with horrifying clarity. The car, the house, the vacations, the dinners. The trust funds I opened for Anthony's kids, every gesture I made, every sacrifice, reduced to a line item on their personal balance sheet. My throat closed. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't speak. My muscles locked in place, caught in a storm of betrayal too vast to name. I don't know how long I stood there, listening. Their laughter melted into the casual clinking of glassware, the soundtrack to my unraveling. My tears came hot and silent, trailing down my cheeks like shame I hadn't earned. I wiped them away roughly, fingers trembling. No one noticed I was there. No one cared. Something inside me fractured, not a clean break, but a jagged, slow split. A quiet rupture I knew would never heal. I turned. Still clutching the velvet box like a useless relic, I walked silently back through the front door, unseen, unacknowledged. Outside, the Aston Martin still gleamed like a silver weapon in the sun, perfect, untouched, waiting. It no longer looked like a gift. It looked like an apology I never owed. I stared at the car, the house, the life I'd built with so much breath and blood, and it all felt absurd. A hollow sculpture erected on the illusion of love. That was the moment everything changed. The best day of my life twisted into something grotesque. The sky hadn't dimmed, but the world had darkened. I don't remember the motion of leaving, only the weight in my chest and the strange, echoing silence in my ears. The front door closed behind me with a soft click that felt final. I left everything where it was, the car, the gift, the illusion. The key went into the mailbox. I didn't look back. I didn't even take my purse. I walked. Down the pristine driveway, past the trimmed hedges and nodding neighbors. One foot in front of the other. Mechanical, detached. I drifted past picket fences and dogs barking behind chain link. And in every glance, I saw something I hadn't noticed before, how invisible I truly was. Like a ghost haunting the life she died building. But there was something oddly liberating in that. For the first time in years, I wasn't calculating someone else's needs. I wasn't performing affection. I wasn't pretending I didn't notice the silence on the other end of the line when I needed them most. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, I found myself in the town center, Wellsford's quaint little heart. Brick sidewalks. Bicycles leaned against iron rails. I slipped into a coffee shop tucked beneath an ivy-covered archway. One of those cozy, cinnamon-scented places where baristas remember your name and dreams die softly. I chose the darkest booth in the back and sat without speaking. Around me, people laughed. Couples shared pastries. Children tugged on sleeves. Life went on. And I sat there, watching through the fog of betrayal, realizing just how profoundly alone I was. My phone buzzed on the table. Anthony. Then again. Mom. I stared at the screen, pulse steady now, breath even. I didn't answer. Not yet. What would I say? That I overheard everything? That I knew they were counting the days until I'd drop dead and leave them the spoils of my work? That I finally saw them for what they were, parasites dressed in family skin? Instead, I stared out the window. I thought about the nights I worked until my vision blurred. The mornings I rose before the sun to chase dreams they never believed in. I thought about the cold hotel rooms, the anxiety before venture pitches, the small moments when I wanted to give up, and didn't. All of it had been for them. And now? Now I had nothing left to give. But beneath the devastation, something darker stirred. Not sadness. Not grief. Something colder. Sharper. A thirst. Not for love. For justice. The air shifted, violently, imperceptibly, and for a moment, it felt as if the earth had pitched sideways just to spit me out. Gravity wasn't holding me anymore. It had joined the rest of them in turning its back. I stood frozen in the long, echoing hallway of that glass and stone mausoleum they called a home, the velvet box in my hand trembling as though it, too, had realized the futility of its offering. It had been chosen with care, wrapped with affection. But now it pulsed with humiliation, heavy with the weight of a love that had never been real. Inside the living room, laughter broke like crystal. My mother's voice, elegant, sharp, and entirely unfamiliar, slithered through the open door. That sound used to mean warmth. Now it scraped like sandpaper across an open wound. A tide of memories surged, bitter and uninvited. The carefully planned birthdays, each gesture met with choreographed delight. The midnight phone calls, full of sighs and affection I'd later realize were rehearsed. The holidays I wrapped in golden garlands, pretending to believe in their gratitude, pretending not to notice their eyes always drifted past me toward what I could give. I had never been their daughter. I'd been their asset. The empire I built, the sleepless years, the missed funerals, the hollowed-out relationships, the relentless climb, all of it had been for them. Or so I believed. But the truth? They'd simply invested. And now they were waiting for their return. I could see it all now with a kind of cruel clarity. The house in Ashmore Heights. The overseas retreats. The designer clothes and private schools for Anthony's twins. Every gift, every bailout, every undeserved second chance, a line on a ledger. A calculation. I was the yield. The dying tree they'd fattened for harvest. My throat tightened. Words refused to form. My limbs wouldn't move. Betrayal doesn't scream, it stuns. It steals the language from your mouth and leaves silence in its place. And still, they laughed. Glasses clinked, as if they hadn't just ripped the spine out of everything I'd built. Tears came, hot and quiet. Not weakness, not grief, but shame. Shame for ever believing I belonged. For mistaking proximity for love. I wiped them away with the back of a shaking hand. No one noticed I was standing there. No one turned. They never saw me, not really. That was the final lesson. Something inside me didn't break. It calcified. I turned, silent and mechanical, the velvet box still clutched in my fist like an artifact of another life. I stepped back through the doorway, each footfall muffled by the rug I'd paid for. Outside, the Aston Martin gleamed in the sun like a polished lie. Beautiful. Expensive. Hollow. It was supposed to be a gift. A symbol. Now it looked like an apology they'd never offer. I stared at the house. At the double doors. At the manicured lawn where I once imagined grandchildren playing while we grew old together. It was all ash. The sun hadn't vanished, but the day had darkened. I don't remember the walk to the curb, only the phantom weight in my chest and the ringing in my ears, like a bomb had gone off and I was the only one left to hear it. The key slid into the mailbox without ceremony. I didn't glance back. Didn't even take my purse. I walked. Down the wide, spotless drive of Sycamore Lane. Past the flower beds and forced smiles of neighbors I'd bought holidays for. Their nods passed through me. I didn't slow down. I didn't exist here anymore. Like a ghost exiled from the house she built. But there was a strange liberation in it, to be unseen, unneeded. To step out of the costume of usefulness and into the skin of something raw and real. For the first time in years, I wasn't cushioning their blows with forgiveness. I wasn't shaping myself around their silence. I wasn't shrinking to fit their shadows. The sun sagged lower as I reached the heart of Branton, a quaint, curated town center with brick walks and carefully aging charm. I pushed through the ivy-wrapped door of an old cafe, the kind with mismatched chairs, cinnamon in the air, and 1,000 whispered regrets soaked into the wood. I found the darkest booth in the corner. And sat. Around me, life continued, laughter, warmth, movement. None of it touched me. My phone vibrated. Anthony. Then again. Mother. I let it buzz. What would I say? That I heard them plotting like vultures? That I finally understood the truth they'd dressed in family costumes? That I saw their smiles for what they were, masks stretched over open jaws? No. I said nothing. Instead, I watched the light dim outside the fogged glass and thought of every sacrifice they'd never see. The 4 a.m. flights. The panic before board meetings. The ulcers, the missed birthdays, the tears swallowed in hotel bathrooms. All of it, for them. And now? Now I had nothing left to give. But beneath the ruin, something colder stirred. It moved like smoke through the hollows of my ribs. Not sorrow. Not loss. Something far older. A thirst. Not for forgiveness. For retribution. Dawn barely stained the sky when I stepped onto the platform at Eastbridge Terminal in Manhattan, the city already thrumming with its relentless rhythm. Horns shrieked, heels clattered on concrete, and caffeine-fueled ambition surged through the streets. Everyone around me moved with purpose. Deadlines. Deals. Promotions. I was invisible. Just another traveler wrapped in anonymity, a small suitcase at my side, too many ghosts in my chest. But beneath my placid exterior, something seismic was shifting. I knew exactly what I was doing. I wasn't just leaving the city. I was abandoning the battlefield. America had raised me, tested me, branded me. It had forged the woman I was, and then tried to break her. Now it was time to vanish. Not in defeat, but in defiance. I didn't glance at my old apartment on Sutton Row. Nothing there mattered anymore. No photographs. No forgotten heirlooms. No letters in drawers I used to reread for comfort. I had brought only what I needed, the small carry-on from Darrow Hollow, my passport, and a laptop that held my life's most dangerous truths. I checked into a sterile glass-front hotel near Hartsfield International, one of those minimalist towers that smells of citrus oil and freshly vacuumed rugs. The clerk handed over my key without a glance, and I was grateful, not for the courtesy, but for the silence. I wasn't in the mood to pretend. Inside my room, I sat on the bed and stared at nothing. The weight of the past week came crashing down like a closing vault door, the betrayal, the calculated vengeance, the thrill of watching their accounts drain while they clinked glasses and laughed about my worth. My hands trembled again, not from fear, but anticipation. The role I'd played for so long, the financier, the fix-it girl, the reliable one, was gone. I was no longer a pillar holding up someone else's cathedral of comfort. I had let it all collapse. And now? Now I was free. I opened my laptop, the glow cutting cleanly through the gray morning light, and with a single keystroke, I booked a one-way escape, first class to Paris. $7,200. I didn't even blink. They used to call me extravagant when I spent on myself. Selfish. Irresponsible. Yet they devoured every cent I gave them. No more guilt. No more penance. The money was mine now, all of it, and I owed them nothing. Airports are strange places. Between here and somewhere else. Between versions of yourself. I wandered through the duty-free shops, letting the scent of cologne and espresso replace the poison in my lungs. People laughed, cried, embraced, argued, dramas unfolding around me like a stage I no longer played on. For so long, I had been essential. Expected. Needed. Always performing. Always sacrificing. Now, I was neither past nor future. I was the breath between. Security was easy. I'd done it 100 times. But this time was different. This time I wasn't traveling for business. Or family. Or obligation. This time I was fleeing, not in panic, but with precision. First class was a soft sanctuary of wide leather, gentle lighting, and quiet attendants who didn't ask questions. They offered champagne before takeoff. I accepted without a smile. The glass trembled slightly in my hand. Outside, the skyline of Manhattan rose like a mausoleum of failed loyalties. Once, it had meant everything. Now, it looked like a city built on my bones. Would I ever return? I wasn't sure I cared. As the plane left the tarmac and broke through cloud, something in me broke open too. Tears came slowly, not sobs, just a silent spill of grief. For the girl who begged for their love. For the woman who gave too much and asked too little. For the years spent buying loyalty she never received. Each tear was a farewell. To Helen's daughter. To Anthony's sister. To the caretaker. The bank. The shield. I wept quietly until the grief drained out like a poison. And in its place came something brighter. Harsher. Not sadness. Relief. Even a savage kind of joy. When I woke, the flight attendant was gently touching my arm. I nodded, took the croissant and the strong coffee she offered, and looked out over the Atlantic. Somewhere over that vast stretch of ocean, the last remnants of my old life slipped away. No more debts. No more masks. No more ghosts to chase. When we landed at Charles de Gaulle, the terminal was a chaos of motion and unfamiliar language. People moved in every direction, shouting, laughing, rushing. But I didn't rush. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't running from something. I was running towards something else entirely. Something mine. Something just. And God help anyone who tried to follow. The taxi slid through the narrow arteries of Paris, the city waking in hushed elegance beyond the rain-slicked glass. Water shimmered on cobblestones and licked the facades of age-worn stone. The Seine, lit in flashes of silver by the morning light, curved like a secret. Umbrellas bobbed between traffic and bicycles, and beneath the gray sky, the world moved without urgency, graceful, unbothered. I found myself smiling. Not the polite, practiced kind I used to wear like armor. A real smile. Unfamiliar. Uncontrolled. I checked into a modest hotel on the left bank, not opulent, but timeless, its iron balconies twisted like vines, its halls echoing with soft creaks and the scent of lilies and old books. My room overlooked the river. I stood at the window for what felt like hours, the city folding itself around me like a bomb. For the first time in my life, I felt safe. That afternoon, I wandered without direction, drifting through alleyways and boulevards like a ghost shedding old skin. Past quiet bookstores where pages whispered, past cafes humming with conversation and clinking china, past Gothic churches that loomed like ancient sentinels. No one knew my name. No one expected anything. It was solitude, but it didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like release. I stopped at a corner cafe and ordered an espresso. The barista didn't ask questions. Around me, French murmured like water over stone, fluid and unknowable. I didn't need to understand the words to feel their rhythm. Back at the hotel, I opened my laptop. A blank document blinked in front of me, waiting. Once, my dreams had revolved around stability for others, insurance plans, payrolls, college funds. I had mortgaged my future to buy everyone else's peace. But now? Now I wrote for me. A list began to take shape, not a business plan, not exactly, but a sketch of a new life. Ideas for a company that wouldn't require me to bleed for others. Scribbled lines about art, food, technology, silence. Mornings filled with sunlight and no demands. For the first time, starting over didn't scare me. It thrilled me. When night fell over Paris, I stepped onto the balcony. The city shimmered below in golden tones, the Seine breathing slowly beneath the bridges. The noise of America, its accusations, its obligations, its endless hunger, felt distant now. Faint. I had left it all behind, the name they praised when they needed something, the role I played so they could remain blameless. And in the space that opened, something new was beginning. If anyone had told me a year ago that I would flee across the ocean to begin again in a city whose language I barely spoke, I would have laughed. Bitterly. But Paris doesn't need to know your story to embrace you. It leaves space for the broken to reassemble themselves. Those first weeks were quiet. Sometimes achingly so. But in that silence, a strange peace took root. The city had its own tempo, erratic but beautiful. I let it teach me how to breathe again. I walked everywhere. Let my past recede like a bad dream. The woman I had been in America became a shadow in motion, distant, unraveling. I found myself most mornings in Montmartre, where the air always smelled of warm bread and coffee, and the streets curled like ribbons. That's where I stumbled upon the bakery, La Chance d'Aus. A sliver of a place with lace curtains, sun-bleached walls, and a faded blue sign above the door. Lucille, the owner, was a widow with flour on her cheeks and a voice like smoke. She sang old chansons while kneading dough and spoke little English. We understood each other anyway. On my first visit, she pressed a still warm pane of chocolate into my hand and waved away my fumbling attempt to pay. "You are new," she said simply, smiling. "Everyone needs someone." That moment stayed with me, a small kindness that felt like a lifeline. I returned the next morning. And the next. Until her kitchen became a kind of sanctuary. Soon I was sweeping floors, washing cups, serving coffee. Not for money. Not for obligation. But because I needed to feel useful without being used. There was comfort in repetition, in watching dough rise, in wiping tables, in sunlight breaking across the counter. It was a kind of healing I had never known in the life I'd left. In America, I'd always been running. Building. Protecting. Here, I was just living. With Lucille's blessing, I quietly invested. We expanded the back room, added worn wooden tables near the windows. Painted the walls a soft, hopeful yellow. A place that felt like warmth had taken physical form. I used some of my money, guiltlessly, to buy a nearby apartment. Small. Quiet. With a crooked balcony that overlooked tiled rooftops and, on clear nights, the gentle glitter of the Eiffel Tower. 1,000 miles away from betrayal, from open wounds masked as family, from the weight of being everything to people who gave nothing, here, I began to breathe. And somewhere between the scent of coffee and the hush of old stones, I began to become someone new. Not rebuilt. Not redeemed. But finally. Mine. I began to fill my small apartment with light, not the blinding kind of ambition I once lived under, but the quiet, golden flicker of choice. From weekend markets along Rue de Cléry, I collected pieces that made me feel something, vivid canvases smeared with chaos, delicate sketches of forgotten faces, clay figures sculpted by trembling hands. For the first time in my life, I was choosing beauty for myself. Not to impress, not to prove, just to belong to the moment. Art had always stirred something in me, but I'd never made space for it. Too busy. Too practical. Too burdened. But Paris is a city built by dreamers, and I let myself be drawn into their orbit. I bought paintings from artists who smelled of turpentine and rain. I listened to them speak of light and shadow like they were gods and ghosts. I helped fund tiny galleries hidden behind courtyards, invested in dim studios that pulsed with wild, necessary hope. I even took a painting class, trembling hand, blank canvas, raw vulnerability. It was terrifying to be a beginner again. To be bad at something. And yet, it made me feel alive. For once, I didn't need to be exceptional. I only needed to be present. The money I had pulled from the wreckage of my life in Connecticut was finally working for me, not as a shield, not as an apology, but as a tool for rebuilding. I invested in modest projects. A few apartments with friends of Lucille, a quiet cafe space near Rue Saint-Roch, nothing loud, nothing that would tether me to the high-stakes machinery of the life I had abandoned. I wasn't chasing empire anymore. I was building a home. Of course, the ghosts tried to follow. Anthony and Helen weren't slow to notice I'd vanished. First came the emails, stunned, accusatory. Then the calls. Pleading. Then furious. Then trembling with desperation. They even hired a private investigator, a man named Peter Godwin, based in London. He sent formal, clipped messages. I read them all with a kind of cold detachment, like reading the last chapter of a book you no longer cared about. But I had planned well. My accounts were hidden, my identity legally changed. France has its own way of protecting secrets, and I had become fluent in privacy. I wasn't hiding. I was gone. And I intended to remain that way. Sometimes, though, curiosity stirred like dust. I wondered if the house had sold. If Anthony had finally stopped blaming the world and found his footing. If Helen missed the daughter she'd used like a scaffold. But the thoughts were like wind against stone. I didn't let them stay. Paris had taught me that the past can only haunt you if you leave the door unlocked. I surrounded myself with people who knew nothing of the woman I used to be. Artists with ink-stained hands. Old men who argued about jazz. Teenagers in the bakery who teased me about my French and taught me better words. And sometimes, alone by the river as the light scattered across the water like coins tossed in prayer, I would think about trust. How easily it's given. How violently it can be taken. If you're reading this, maybe you know that violence too. Maybe you've stood in the rubble of betrayal, trying to breathe through the smoke. I won't lie to you. It doesn't always get easier. But it does get quieter. Walking away was the hardest thing I've ever done, and the kindest thing I've ever done for myself. I learned something here in this city of fog and firelight. Happiness isn't what you give until you're empty. It's what you allow yourself to keep. I found laughter again, not in the applause of those who needed me, but in the easy kindness of strangers. In the crooked grin of children with sticky fingers. In shared bottles of wine and conversations that wandered into dawn. I built something here, not a legacy, not a legend. Something smaller. Something honest. I found meaning in the quiet. In a hot coffee sipped alone at sunrise. In the first bite of bread warm from Lucille's oven. In the hush of midnight street lamps and cigarette smoke curling into the air. As months blurred into years, the anger softened. The sadness unknotted. And slowly, I let it go. I forgave Helen and Anthony, not because they asked, not because they changed, but because forgiveness is a door you unlock for your own escape. I came to understand I could be both, American and European, daughter and orphan, whole and still mending. I could carry my past without wearing it like armor. I could trust again. Carefully. First myself, and then, maybe, someone else. That birthday, the one that detonated everything, became my liberation. If you're standing at the edge of something, if your hands are trembling and your voice is caught in your throat, hear this. Yes. You have the strength to walk away. Sometimes the deepest act of love is letting go of those who never really saw you. I began again here. Not as someone's daughter. Not as someone's caretaker. But simply as myself. And for the first time, that was enough.